I'm Liz Faublas, and this is Currents. The situation escalates in Sudan with Christianity caught in the crossfire. Plus, John Paul II's teaching on human sexuality inspires a series of columns by Bishop DiMarzio.
The unity between body and soul, sometimes, we have this Gnostic idea, this separation of body and soul. The body is bad and the spirit is good, but he was bringing the two together.
Is it art for controversy's sake, or is there a greater point?
True meaning of art is truth. An artist should be dedicated to truth.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Sudan and South Sudan are gripped in a hostile and sometimes deadly civil dispute. The key problems? Conflicting claims over oil revenues. Both sides desperately need the oil to run their governments, feed their people, and stamp out insurrections. Also an issue, the lack of a firm internationally recognized border between Sudan and the Republic of South Sudan, which became independent last July. Meantime, aerial bombardments, ground force skirmishes, and increasingly hostile rhetoric from leaders on both sides of the Sudanese border has some religious leaders and organizations like the Catholic charity Caritas International worried that a full-scale war is imminent. Catholic Relief Services offers assistance in the region. CRS provides critical relief materials to affected populations, and it's working to make sure improved access to water, sanitation facilities, and shelter are available in the region. Now, it's certainly a challenging mission, says Sean Callahan. He's Executive Vice President for CRS's overseas operations. I spoke with Sean, who visited the North African region this year to get his firsthand account of just how dire and volatile the situation has become. Sean, you've traveled recently to the Sudanese region. Now, here in the U.S., we hear about it. We see it on TV. We read about it in the papers. But from your vantage point, from a first-hand perspective, can you describe really the horrors and the crisis that you've seen?
I recently came back from South Sudan, and I went for a visit to Juba, which is the capital, and then north of the capital to some areas that CRS is working up in the Jonglei state called Bor and Pibor. Unfortunately, those areas have had some massacres between various ethnic and tribal groups there that have caused a lot of migrations and hardship and obviously deaths and all. One of the big conflicts that's happening, as we've noted in the news, is the crisis between Sudan and South Sudan along the border areas with oil. And when we were there, they had initiated what they called an austerity budget, which was not using any of the oil revenues. So they shut it all down until they could have a proper accounting for it. The South Sudanese did. And what that meant was that 98% of their budget was frozen at that time. And so looking for the international community to try to help them, one, resolve some of their border clashes and the oil issue, as well as provide some assistance for them at a time where it's the newest nation on earth. They're struggling forming a new government and a new constitution, and at a time where there is internal violence and then violence in the north.
And Sean, the church and CRS are front and center, obviously, when it comes to efforts to promote peace in the region. How much has this violence prohibited real substantive development from taking place?
The church, played, frankly, a spectacular role in providing a backstop and a support to the church in Sudan. During the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, the church spoke out more and more and was really one of the guiding stars in the various communities and outreaching. And we had staff going from village to village, meeting with diocesan staff, church centers, community groups to educate them, because many of these people had never voted before. So people really took some great risks to come out and vote. That being said, they did vote for independence and they separated. And to be honest with you, we have seen a lot of progress that has gone on. When I first went to Juba, there was one little paved road. Now more roads are being paved. The infrastructure is being improved. They've got communication systems that are able to work now. And many schools and clinics, things are now being built. At the same time, there are great struggles that the people are facing and that the government's facing right now. And so they are looking for the international community to continue to assist there. And frankly, a lot of responsibility that the church is playing, because the comment that we heard time and time again is, we won the war, and you helped us during that difficult time. Now let's not lose the peace.
Sean, the progress actually is so encouraging to hear about, because we don't really hear too much about that. But you do talk about the instability in the region. Not too long ago, Dan Griffin, the Sudan advisor for the U.S. Bishops Catholic Relief Services, told CNS that fears are very real, that a looming disaster exists, and that the current border conflict could give rise to a new war. How real is that concern?
I think there is right now, either a looming war, or basically in some places there's already somewhat of a silent war. And I think the words that Dan was speaking at that time was to make people aware that the situation, although we have an independent South Sudan now, the situation in South Kordofan and Blue Nile and in some of these other border regions still is very tenuous, and is very much like a warlike situation.
And Sean, really quickly, on a more personal level, you're there to safeguard the people and mediate peace. How do you and CRS protect yourselves? You've had to close some offices in the past. How do you safeguard your own well-being while you're there?
We do, try to take all the precautions possible. Because we work with the local church, we do have a sophisticated network of people working in a lot of these isolated areas. We did know up front when some groups were coming to attack other groups and had notified people. So there are warning symbols that can be out there, and we can evacuate and move staff at different times. But I must say, one of the reasons why I went there was to show the moral support for a lot of our staff who are really, sacrificing a lot and living in very, very difficult conditions. The weather there is exceedingly hot, over 100 degrees, oftentimes no electricity, goes in and out. There's a lot of malaria and cerebral malaria and things. So a lot of the people who are working out there are really the true heroes that are trying to assist village by village these communities.
All right, Sean, thank you so much. And from all of us here, we certainly do appreciate your sacrifice. And thank you very much for spending some time with us today. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for sharing this news to our constituency in the United States. We appreciate it.
It's our pleasure. It really is such a heartbreaking situation. The international community, led by the U.S., has called for the two countries to stop all military actions against each other and restart negotiations to solve their disputes. Stay tuned. The day's top headlines and a lot more currents on the other side of this break. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Liz Faublas. As the saying goes, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em. The man who managed Rick Santorum's presidential campaign is now working for Mitt Romney. The Romney campaign hired Michael Biondo, described by the Washington Post as a longtime grassroots campaign organizer. The Post reports Biondo will help unite Tea Party activists, evangelicals, and other conservatives behind the presumptive Republican nominee. Throughout the campaign, Romney was seen as the least conservative candidate among a field that included Santorum and former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, both of whom are Catholic. A Gingrich spokesman says the former speaker will endorse Romney, and that's according to the Wall Street Journal. U.S. bishops welcomed the repeal of the death penalty in Connecticut. Bishop Stephen Blair, who chairs the Bishops' Conference Committee on Domestic Justice and Human Development, called the decision by the governor and legislature courageous. Blair says the bishops stand in solidarity with all who uphold the sanctity of human life. An atheist group wants to have a cross that's been at a Rhode Island firehouse for 91 years removed. The Freedom from Religion Foundation argues that the cross in the fire station's parking lot demonstrates the town's preference for Christianity over other religions and non-religion. The foundation also wants a prayer removed from the fire department's website for the same reason. Woonsocket's mayor says he has no intention of removing the cross under any circumstances. The city council president says the organization is, quote, completely off base with its complaint. He says if it was right, the Supreme Court houses in Washington would need to be rebuilt and Arlington National Cemetery would have to be closed. The Bishop of Worcester, Massachusetts, says he will not ask a Catholic college to reconsider a decision to disinvite Ted Kennedy's widow. Last month, the Board of Trustees of Anna Maria College announced that it had rescinded its invitation to Victoria Reggie Kennedy. Bishop Robert McManus had raised concerns about Kennedy's support for abortion rights and same-sex marriage. Two groups delivered a petition to the bishop asking him to reconsider his decision. McManus says he still stands behind his concerns. A blind pro-life activist in China has managed to escape house arrest. Reports say Chen Guangchang, an outspoken critic of China's forced abortion policy, is hiding somewhere in Beijing. He escaped last Sunday after being confined to his home for 18 months under heavily guarded detention. One of the people who aided in the escape spoke with CNN.
I'm not concerned about my own safety. I hope they'll arrest me, not my friends. When Chen told me he wants to stay in China, I told myself I'll be willing to stand by him no matter what happens next. Chen also said as long as he's not free, no other Chinese will feel safe. So I'm not leaving and I'm not worried. I just hope he's safe and well.
And now Chen released a video on YouTube detailing the harsh treatment he and his family endured.
They broke into my house and more than a dozen men assaulted my wife. They said, "We don't care about the law. We ignore the law. What can you do about it?" They repeatedly led people to my house to attack and rob us.
Chen is a lawyer who has advocated for victims of alleged human rights abuses in China, including women who have been forced to have abortions because of the country's one-child policy. Priests in Ireland say they will not break the seal of confession to report sex abuse. Under a new law in Ireland, people are required to report instances of sexual abuse that they learn of. Now, according to the Irish Independent, the country's justice minister says that the law applies to priests hearing confessions. Under church law, priests may not repeat anything they hear during confession. Breaking what is known as the seal of confession results in excommunication. Well, the show goes on for Lady Gaga in South Korea. Despite protests by Christian groups there, protesters urged the pop star to cancel her concert Friday in Seoul, calling it pornographic and arguing that it promoted homosexuality. The government did issue a directive banning anyone under the age of 18 from attending the show. The singer, who is no stranger to controversy, advocated for the legalization of same-sex marriage in New York. And the winner is a photo from World Youth Day. Rome Reports has that story.
Divine Awakening is the title of the winning image of the 5th annual photo contest of the community of Madrid. Among the 114 photographs that were entered, the winner came from last year's World Youth Day in the Spanish capital. The photo is of a group of nuns praying around a group of young people that just awoke from their night of camping outdoors. It came from a local photographer, Samuel Sanchez, who works for the Spanish newspaper El País. He explained that the image was taken the morning after the night vigil and captures the moment when the young boys first lift their heads from their sleeping bags on August 21st, 2011.
And finally, former Goldman Sachs partner George Doty, who was known later in life for giving generously to the Catholic Church, has died. Doty died of pulmonary fibrosis at his home in Rye, New York. He was 94 years old. He joined Goldman in 1964 as a partner and became head of the firm's administrative department. Doty donated to his alma mater, Fordham University, every year since 1957. According to the Catholic Near East Welfare Association, he and his wife also led the renovation of the Great Dome of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Cardinal Edward Egan says Doty was one of the country's great businessmen and that his generosity to the Archdiocese of New York was unmatched. Please stay tuned. There's more currents ahead. Coming up, what is theology of body? Bishop DiMarzio writes about it in a new tablet series.
Theology of the body, which he basically developed as a way of teaching the church's understanding of human sexuality, what the body means, and the unity between body and soul.
Welcome back. When the Catholic Church speaks out against some controversial topics like the federal contraception mandate or the legalization of same-sex marriage, some observers and critics may ask why. Well, it all boils down to the Church's understanding of human sexuality and the human person. It's an understanding that is explained in detail by the late Pope John Paul II in a series of talks that he gave. Bishop DiMarzio is now writing about this teaching known as Theology of the Body in our diocesan newspaper, The Tablet. The bishop recently talked more about it with our news director, Ed Wilkinson.
Bishop, thanks again for being with us today. You're currently writing a series of columns for the tablet on the theology of the body, and that's a phrase that Blessed John Paul II, I think, made pretty famous. He gave note to it. What does that mean, the theology of the body?
Well, it comes from the almost 140 Wednesday audiences that the Holy Father gave, John Paul II. Each week he would talk about the theology of the body, which he basically developed as a way of teaching the church's understanding of human sexuality, what the body means, and the unity between body and soul. Sometimes, we have this Gnostic idea, this separation of body and soul. The body is bad and the spirit is good, but he was bringing the two together. I think the best way he ever did it when he gave this wonderful homily when the Sistine Chapel had been renovated. And he spoke about the beautiful work of Michelangelo. Interesting enough, there was a pope after Michelangelo had completed it who decided this was too much for him. So he had loincloths painted on many of the images. But there's a difference between pornography and art. If we look at the statue of Venus de Milo or David, we don't think it's pornography. It's art, and because we don't focus, we focus on the whole ambient, the whole person, the beautiful way this artist was able to depict the human body. Because the purpose is not in any way a sexual gratification, but it is to look at the body as God's creation. This is the highest point of God's creation, the human person, a body and soul that are united. So when he gave that homily, he was very clear, showing that this was the place where the theology of the body could be seen in true form, in the best way.
But the church has not changed its teaching at all on sexuality. This is just another way of talking about it, a more contemporary way of talking about it.
Yeah,
right?
I think we do need a more contemporary way, because it looks like to most people that the church is just very negative about sexuality, and that's the way most people see it. Unfortunately, we've got to be positive and show what we do believe and why we think certain things should not be done. We have reasons for it. It isn't arbitrary. It isn't repressive. It isn't a hatred of sexuality or the body, but it's true appreciation of it. So that's why we have to teach better than we did in the past.
A lot of times people feel that the church talks too much about sex, but isn't it true that really the church is responding to the signs of our times?
Well, it's true. This is our culture is permeated by sexuality, and we have to address that if we're going to address the culture.
Why did you choose this time to write this series of columns about this?
Well, perhaps I've been thinking about it for a while, but I think perhaps the whole idea of the mandate that came from Obamacare and the church's prohibition on contraception, sterilization, most people don't understand that. They took all these wonderful polls to show that Catholics don't agree. Well, they may not agree or practice, but the basic thing is they don't understand why the church thinks this is wrong or believes it's wrong, and it goes way back. You look on the issue of contraception. I reread the classic work by Noonan on just called Contraception. It goes back from the beginning, from the first century of the church, from the teaching of the apostles, the Didache, right up into modern times, showing that the church has developed this and an understanding that didn't happen yesterday, but it was something that grew over time in understanding of human sexuality. When the human body was a mystery, nobody knew much about it, certainly 2,000 years ago. But as science developed and as we know more about conception, etc., so these are all the things that we need to get out so people understand where we're coming from. So I think this was the time that we really needed to hear this.
Do you think the advances in science that the modern world has made assists us in doing this?
Well, it should. There's no conflict between science and our theology, but there has to be the time when we intersect, when we understand better what science has discovered and how we interpret it. The whole new ability for doing artificial means of conception has to be understood. Why is the church wary or prohibitive in some of these methods? What's the difference? You know, the church said you should have children. Well, I want to have a child. Why can't I have artificial insemination? Why can't I do something that will help me have a child? It's not clearly understood by most people.
It's very interesting topics, and it's thanks for writing the series, and thanks for being with us today.
Good to be with you.
Always good to hear from Bishop DiMarzio. Stay with us. There's more Currents ahead. When we return, is there a fine line between art and the offensive? Cultural critics weigh in.
It's all become so cliched, so trite, so, you know, we're just inundated with trash.
Finally tonight, the art world is no stranger to controversy, which sometimes comes at the expense of the Catholic Church. Just last year, the Brooklyn Museum accepted an exhibit that included a video showing ants crawling on a crucifix. And it wasn't the first time the museum has featured work offensive to Catholic sensibilities. In 1999, it displayed an image of the Virgin Mary covered in elephant dung. But are these uses of Catholic imagery valid, or do they cross a line? At Fordham University this week, a pair of cultural critics weighed in.
The loss of a transcendent religious vision, a refined and rigorous sense of the sacred, the breaking and discarding of 2,000 years of Christian symbols, mythos, and tradition has left American art spiritually impoverished.
Welcome to Taking Offense When Art and the Sacred Collide, a forum organized by the Fordham Center on Religion and Culture.
Artists, which was not brought up in this, although one of the questions was that art is to be provocative. The true meaning of art is truth. An artist should be dedicated to truth. How that is done, how it is expressed, there certainly will vary.
There are no great artists left anywhere in the world in the visual arts. And one of the problems here is, one of the reasons for this is the suffusion of a very callow and cliched political ideology everywhere.
Since art's goals are provocation and pleasure, while religion's goals are protection and piety, should it not be just inevitable, but also healthy for the culture and the society that they constantly and creatively collide?
Art should offer a challenge to religion when religion is a strong force. But what I'm saying is that religion is not such a dominant force today as it was, let's say, in the 1950s, the very conservative Catholicism of my youth.
It's all become so cliched, so trite, so, you know, we're just inundated with trash.
The arts world is full of talent. It's full of energy, of ambition. But somehow, collectively, it now feels remote, exhausted, and increasingly irrelevant.
It really burns me up the double standard in the art world, where any kinds of a desecration of a Catholic image is permitted in museums coast to coast, but try to do the same thing to any kinds of a symbol from Judaism or from Islam, and there would be like an enormous storm.
My feeling is that things are most offensive to people when there's not a good intent behind it, or there's not a good message or a question, and it just exists for the sake of being controversial.
These questions are important to people in terms of what's too much, what's not enough, what is relevant and acceptable critique or satire or parroting, and what isn't.
In order to understand the history of art, you need to have respect for religion.
And that is all for this edition of Currents. We'd love to have you visit us online at currentsny.net and follow us on Twitter. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Liz Faublas. Thank you for watching and have a good night.